My narrative begins when I was 23 years old and living in the suburbs in my grandmother's former home. When she died, she had left it to me. A good-hearted woman who always made sure I had all I needed was my father's mother. Despite not being brand new or ostentatious, the house was sturdy and kept up. And it was located in a peaceful area where you could really hear birdsong in the morning. My name is Lizzie, and my life looked to be very simple at the time. I had a wonderful career, a house of my own, and a family that I believed to be supportive. My mom, my stepfather, and my 18-year-old younger half-sister, Piper. They were still making payments on a large mortgage that would take many more years to pay off, but they lived in a more contemporary home near the city. When my mom came over for our monthly coffee one Sunday afternoon, she said, "Lizzie, honey, can we talk? As you are aware, your stepdad and I have been thinking about how your house is precisely what we had always imagined. The garden area and the peaceful setting." Wondering where this was headed, I nodded. "And I know your commute to work is pretty rough from here," she said. "Our house is so much closer to your office." At that point, she revealed her ingenious plan to move. I would replace them in the city home, and they would move into my grandmother's house. "I just need to keep paying their mortgage," she stated. She added, "Think about it," with joy shining in her eyes. "The house is larger and more contemporary, and you'd save a ton of time on that journey. In addition, this is the kind of location your stepdad and I have always desired to call home." I thought about it for a while. She was not mistaken. Their home would reduce my daily trip in half, plus it was newer, with a more spacious kitchen. "What about the paperwork?" I inquired. "Shouldn't we get something in writing?" Mom dismissed it with a wave of her hand. "We're family, honey. Why spend money on attorneys? You are aware that I would never harm you in any way." And then the move came swiftly. I had no trouble adjusting to my new surroundings. I dutifully gave Mom the mortgage payment each month, generally in excess of the minimum amount since I wanted to contribute to a quicker payoff. I also spent money renovating the house, changing out outdated appliances, and updating a few rooms. That was our agreement for 4 years. I consistently made my mortgage payments, even making additional contributions when I could. I had a contemporary home, a shorter commute, and what I believed to be a firm agreement with my family, so everything appeared ideal. 2 weeks of meetings, presentations, and hotel rooms made the business trip to the adjacent state seem like any other. To be honest, I was excited to return home and sleep in my own bed. Being shut out of my life was the last thing I anticipated. I was dropped off by my Uber on a cold evening. As I wheeled my luggage up the driveway, I noticed something strange. Voices could be heard inside, and the porch light was on. It was strange because I didn't have any lights on and I lived alone. What the hell? I tried inserting my key into the lock while muttering. It was too small. I gave it another go. Then again, when I discovered the locks had been altered, my bewilderment turned to fear. I was on the verge of calling a locksmith when the door suddenly opened. My 22-year-old sister Piper was standing there, wearing my beloved fuzzy slippers, and she was staring at me as if I were an unwelcome salesperson. A tall man who I knew to be her new husband was lounging on my couch behind her, with his feet propped up on my coffee table. Piper leaned against the doorframe and murmured, "Oh, you're back?" with a grin that I wanted to slap her face. "Your stuff's in the garage." Trying to take in what I was hearing, I stood there with my luggage still in hand. My belongings. "What are you discussing? This is my home." She looked at her immaculately manicured nails, which our parents had always paid for, even when they stated they couldn't afford new school clothing for me. "Not anymore," she murmured. "It was a wedding gift from our parents. We now reside here." There was a brief sideways tilt to the planet. "Are you crazy? For the past 4 years, I have been making mortgage payments on this home." "Yeah, about that," Piper said, rolling her eyes in a manner reminiscent of her mother's dismissal of someone's emotions. "I don't really have that issue. The house was given to us by our parents." She waved her hand in a shooing manner. "You must go. Before we contact the police, leave our premises." Memories of all the times Piper had received preferential treatment began to flood my mind as I stood on my own porch, suddenly homeless. These memories included the new iPhone when I was still using a flip phone, designer clothes when I was getting hand-me-downs, the brand new car for her 16th birthday while I was taking the bus, and the cost of college tuition while I was working my way through community college. As my younger sister got ready to shut the door in my face, I stood there shaking with anger. Where am I supposed to go? She gave a shrug. It's not my issue. Obtain a hotel or accommodation. Please don't return here. The door closed with a bang. From within, I could hear laughter as my sister and her spouse settled into the home I had spent 4 years building, renovating, and paying for. I don't recall making my way back to my car on foot. The journey to my grandmother's house, which I had given them in our trade, and our parents' house is something I don't recall. I kept thinking about how this pattern had existed all along. The special treatment, the favoritism, the way Piper always got what she wanted, while I was supposed to just put up with it. However, this one was unique. This was more than a new phone or a high-end purse. This was all I had worked for, my life, my house. Ready for a brawl, I bounded up to my former residence. The garden I had nurtured for years prior to our trade was covered in lengthy shadows from the porch light. By the time I got to the door, my hand was already clenched into a fist, and I hammered it till it hurt. Open up, Mom. We must discuss Piper's recent actions. The door didn't open, but I could hear footsteps coming toward it and hushed words within. My mother said, "Lizzie," in a hushed but sufficiently distinct voice as she entered the room. "Go away." That couldn't have been heard correctly. What? Open the door, Mom. I was recently locked out of my house by Piper, the home for which I have been making mortgage payments for the past 4 years. Adding, "That's not your house anymore," was my stepfather's tone. Furthermore, this is not your home. This is now our home. The ground beneath my feet seemed like it was tilting. What are you discussing? I live here. It was left to me by Grandma. Mom said, "You need to leave," in that harsh tone she used when she believed she was being rational. Go for a place to rent an apartment. Quit making people anxious by going from home to house. I tried to stabilize myself by pressing my palms firmly on the door. Are you feeling uneasy? Do you mean me? I've been kicked out of my house. You won't even let me in to discuss Piper's living in the house I've been paying for. When Mom retorted, "We've invested a lot in this house. We've done renovations, improvements. And what about all the money I spent fixing up your house?" I didn't care what the neighbors thought. I was shouting now. The new appliances, the remodeled bathroom, the 4 years of mortgage payments. That's different. Different? How? Mom, what's different? Didn't you plan this out beforehand? While you were living in my home, get me to pay your mortgage. Then give Piper my place and keep Grandma's house for yourself. Excellent plan. While you all split up my possessions, leave me destitute. A pause occurred. Then Mom's voice returned, rough and icy. "Lizzie, you have to go now. This is our home, and you are not welcome." I felt something crack within of me. Countless house upgrades, 4 years of mortgage payments, and a lifetime of witnessing Piper achieve her goals. All of it solidified into one distinct idea. I responded, "Actually, Mom, you're wrong about one thing," in a strangely composed tone. "I live here. The deed is still in my name legally. Remember how Grandma left it to me? And if you like evicting people from their houses so much, perhaps it's time for me to do the same." "You wouldn't dare," snarled my stepfather. "Try me," I retorted. "I've had enough of playing the nice guy. I'm tired of seeing you take advantage of me while favoring Piper. I'll have you evicted if you don't leave my house." Lawfully. Behind the door, there was silence. I turned and left after waiting a moment longer. I knew what I had to do, but I had nowhere to go. An hour later, with my business trip luggage still packed, I was checking into a budget hostel. I took out my phone and began looking for attorneys. Mr. Thompson, the attorney I hired, didn't play around. He got all the required eviction paperwork ready in 2 days. I watched from my porch behind him as he rapped sharply and professionally at the door. When Mom opened it this time and saw the legal paperwork in Mr. Thompson's hand, her face went white. He said, "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," in a clear, professional voice. "I'm here on behalf of Lizzie, your daughter, who is the property's legitimate owner. I have served you with a notice of eviction." "You can't do this." Behind Mom, my stepfather emerged, his face flushed with rage. Mr. Thompson was unconvinced. "We can, and we are, in fact. You've got 3 days to leave the property. We'll have to call the police and take legal proceedings for forcible removal if you don't cooperate." I watched in silence as my mother's face went through phases of astonishment, rage, and terror. I ignored her attempt to get my attention. I had had enough of her trickery. She tried to say, "Lizzie, honey," in a lovely, syrupy voice. "We can talk about this. The time for talking was before you locked me out of my house and gave it to Piper," I said. "3 days, Mom, that's all you get." The longest 3 days of my life were those 3 days. They actually did comply, which surprised me because I stayed in my hostel and jumped every time my phone called. Mr. Thompson contacted me on the morning of the 4th day to let me know that the home was free and my parents had left. They were packing the last of their things into a moving vehicle when I got there. Mom's red-rimmed eyes watched me from the driveway. She shouted, "You're no daughter of mine," as tears poured down her cheeks. "You're a traitor. After everything we've done for you." "Done for me?" I gave a sour laugh. "You mean you intended to steal my house and used me to pay your mortgage for 4 years?" "Yes, I appreciate that." Without saying another word, she climbed into their vehicle, and I watched them go for whatever rental they had found. The driveway abruptly became empty when the moving vehicle followed. I had my house back. I discovered mayhem inside. Items scattered, drawers left open, but nothing seriously broken. I had an epiphany as I was standing in my grandmother's living room, which is also my living room. I had paid off their mortgage. The instant they locked me out of the residence I had been paying for, they had violated our verbal agreement. They might now face the repercussions. I felt my grandmother's presence as I settled into her antique rocking rocker. And I grinned for the first time since this nightmare started. I kept thinking about all the money I had spent on my parents' house, including the bathroom remodel, the pricey water heater, and new kitchen appliances. I thought that one day the house would be truly mine, so I treated it as such. The mortgage was the real smack in the teeth. I felt like I was doing something wise for my future by consistently contributing more money than was needed for years. My calculations showed that there was only around $50,000 left to pay. If I continued to make payments at my current pace for another 2 years, the house would have been paid for in full. I had been quite near. I muttered to the empty chamber, all that money. All those additional payments. Suddenly, a memory that I had previously dismissed came flooding back to me in a completely different way. We had just completed the house swap. With that naive expression she often had when she desired something, Mom had been stirring her coffee at her new kitchen table. "Lizzie, honey," she had continued, "I've been considering. Perhaps you should just give us the house deed now that we're residing here. Make it official, you know. Naturally, when the mortgage is paid off, we will sign our house over to you." I recalled how rational she had attempted to portray it, as if it were only organizing papers, but I had a better plan. "Why don't we do it the other way around?" I had recommended. "I'll continue to formally make the mortgage payments once you move the mortgage under my name. After that, I'll immediately give you the keys to Grandma's house." For a moment, Mom's expression shifted, but she quickly disguised it with a grin. I ought to have noticed it back then. "Oh, no," she had blurted out. "With the bank, that would be quite difficult. Waiting until the mortgage is paid off is preferable. After that, we can switch both residences cleanly." Then Stepdad had rushed in, giving a forceful nod. "Lizzie, it's much easier that way. There's no need to call in the bank or attorneys. After all, we are family." Now that I was seated in my grandmother's rocking rocker, I could see everything well. That home had never been their intention. They had desired my house as much as theirs. A shiver went down my spine if I had signed away my grandmother's house as they had requested. At this point, I would have been totally destitute. No contingency plan. Both properties are unclaimed legally. My family enjoyed both residences while I was just out on the street. If nothing else, I'd been smart enough to keep this place legally mine. When I considered all the money I had lost, it didn't bring me much solace. But at least I had a place to live, a roof over my head, and most importantly, a lesson in trust, even in family. Particularly with relation to family, perhaps. 3 days after the late mortgage payment, my phone rang. Mom's name appeared on the screen as I sat in my grandmother's kitchen sipping coffee and attempting to reconstruct my past. I nearly didn't respond, but I needed and desired this confrontation. Even, "Where's the mortgage payment?" Not even a greeting from her. Her tone was abrasive and arrogant, as if I were a non-dwelling tenant instead of her daughter. I laughed, and I think I sounded a little crazy. "The bank's going to charge us late fees," I said. "Are you seriously calling to ask me for money right now?" "I certainly am. You must make the mortgage payment." My knuckles grew white as I gripped my coffee mug tightly. "Let me get this straight," I muttered. "You want that I continue to pay for the house I've been paying for after evicting me and giving it to Piper and her new spouse? Are you crazy? That house belongs to Piper." I interrupted her. "Then have Piper foot the bill. Doesn't she presently reside there? She is enjoying life to the fullest with her spouse in the home I have been paying for and have remodeled." When things weren't going her way, Mom's voice grew harsh, reaching that peak she always did. "Piper is unable to make mortgage payments. She recently received her college degree. She hasn't even started working yet. They're still getting settled after their lovely wedding. Not my problem." I interrupted her once more as an odd serenity descended upon me. "No more. You handed my house to her. Fantastic. She also receives the mortgage payments." After a moment, Mom's voice became menacing, the same tone she had used to control me since I was a little child. "Fine, then we'll just move back into your house." That made me laugh aloud, and it was satisfying. "You'll do it like hell. I'll have you arrested for trespassing if you try it. I've kicked you out once already. Are you up for a second round? You can't simply stop making payments. We made a deal. When you handed Piper and her husband my house, you violated an agreement. In any case, you're nearly finished paying it off. Is there still around $50,000 left?" My stomach dropped as I heard the quiet on the other end. There was the sort of stillness that precedes very awful news. "Mom, it's more than that." She had become a little remorseful in her voice. "How much more?" Another pause, this one longer. On the other end of the telephone, I could hear her breathing. "About $150,000. The globe appeared to slant to one side. Fortunately, my coffee mug did not break when it fell out of my fingers and clattered against the counter. "What? That isn't feasible. For 4 years, I have been making additional payments on that mortgage. I contributed thousands more than was necessary. No way." "Well, what did you do with the extra money I sent?" My voice had become so loud that it reverberated off the walls of the kitchen. "What did you do with it?" The ensuing hush was deafening. The next thing my mother said chilled my blood. She answered, "Oh, we paid the regular mortgage payments," as if she were talking about the weather. "The additional funds you sent? Yes, we had costs." "Expenses." I hardly spoke above a whisper. "What expenses?" "Well, after all the strain of relocating, your stepdad and I wanted a vacation. We spent 3 weeks in Europe, seeing Paris, Rome, and Madrid, all stunning places. In fact, she let out a dreamy sigh. Next came the cost of Piper's college education. You are aware of the current high cost of private institutions. Naturally, we also needed to make renovations to the house. I was having trouble breathing. Even after years of additional payments and spending hundreds and thousands of dollars on renovations and vacations, while I believed I was paying off the mortgage you stole from me, I was still able to say, You took my money and went on vacation with it. Lizzie, stop being so dramatic. We are related. We just reallocated the cash to the areas that needed them the most. I ended the call. My hands trembled so much that I dropped the phone. I sat in my grandmother's rocking rocker for an hour, shaking with anger and betrayal. I blocked all of their numbers, Mom, Dad, Piper, after I had stopped trembling. Naturally, though, it wasn't that simple. They arrived at my door 2 days later, shouting and hammering as if they were the owners. Open this door right now. Mum's voice sounded high-pitched. We need to talk about the mortgage payment. I remained still on the opposite side of the door. There is nothing to discuss. I refuse to spend any more money. You have too. Stepdad's voice now, demanding and angry. You're responsible for the payments. I yelled back, actually, I'm not, feeling more powerful with a sturdy barrier between us. However, do you know what I have? All of my payments are shown on my bank statements, emails and texts regarding our arrangement to exchange houses. According to the attorney I spoke with yesterday, there is proof of fraud. The opposite side of the door was silent. If you don't stop harassing me, I went on, I'll take you to court. And believe me, I am far more able to finance a protracted, costly court struggle than you are. Do you want to take a chance? A series of profanities that would have made a sailor blush were hurled before they left. I held my breath until I heard their car pull away, and then I let it. Tracy, my cousin, called a week later. You might want to know that your parents are having problems, Lizzie. They're having trouble making their mortgage payments. All of their money, including their retirement fund, has been spent, and Piper. When they informed her that she needed to begin making mortgage payments, she got into a heated argument with them. She apparently yelled that they had promised her a free house rather than a debt. The ranting was audible from across the street, according to the neighbors. I hummed up and gazed at the landscape outside my window. My grandmother's irises were in full flower, their purple petals gleaming against the verdant foliage. You get what you sow, she had always told me. I pondered what my family might gain by sowing the seeds of treachery. I learned from rumors that my parents had ultimately betrayed Piper 3 months after I ceased making home payments. Emma, my cousin, called to share the story with me. Her words, "You won't believe this." In fact, they reported Piper and her husband to the police. It seems that they told Piper that she had to either start making mortgage payments or leave. They arrived with 2 police officers and an eviction order when she refused. The neighbors claimed that as they were collecting their belongings, Piper was yelling about unfulfilled promises. However, that was only the start. Family members began calling, each bringing a different piece of the jigsaw to the table. According to Aunt Sarah, they were requesting loans from everyone. According to Uncle Bob, they attempted to refinance but were turned down. They were investigating reverse mortgages, according to Cousin Mark. The call that truly opened my eyes came next. Mom's sister, Aunt Mary, who was usually the family gossip, had the inside information. She said in a whispery, secretive tone, "Did you know about the other loans? You won't believe this, but they also borrowed money for Piper's honeymoon in addition to taking out personal loans for her car. That expensive Mercedes she received for graduating covered the cost of her 2-week trip to the Maldives with her spouse. The amount of debt they owe is enormous." I sat with that knowledge for a long time, recalling all the times I had saved money for additional mortgage payments by eating ramen noodles. My buddy Sarah at the bank provided the last piece of the puzzle. She leaned across the table, appearing worried, as we were enjoying coffee. "I probably shouldn't tell you this," she added, "but last week your parents received a demand letter from the bank. They are currently 3 months past due on their payments." I slowly stirred my coffee. "Let me guess. They're about to lose the house." She gave a nod. "If they don't come up with the money soon, the bank will foreclose." I knew what was going to happen. They would arrive at my home, sobbing, expressing regret, and pleading for assistance. They would pledge to improve and put things right. Like when she originally proposed the house exchange, Mom would most likely bring her apple pie. However, I was finished. I've finished being their ATM. I've had enough of them favoring Piper. I'm done allowing them to control me. They had already decided on several mortgages, personal loans, extravagant vacations, and pricey vehicles. They could now accept the repercussions. I surveyed the sturdy walls and flourishing garden of my grandmother's house, which is also my home. She had left it up to me because she wanted me to have a stable future, not to make up for my parents' poor choices. They're going to lose everything, Aunt Mary stated during her final call. Aren't you going to help them? As they spent money on trips, I reflected on the 4 years I had been paying their mortgage. I considered having my sister live in the house I paid for, having my belongings placed in the garage, and being shut out of my house. No, I eventually said, I'm not. You can't assist those who won't help themselves, and that's sometimes the toughest thing to learn. My folks had already prepared their bed. They may lay in it now. I had my own home, my own life to live, and my own future to look forward to. And I wasn't sharing this time. I am Janice, and I am 20 years old. Achieving independence has consistently been my objective. Everything appeared to align when I received a full scholarship for college admission. The scholarship covered my tuition entirely. However, I still required accommodation. My mother subsequently conceived what seemed to be the optimal solution. She remarked, I have been contemplating. One evening as we sat in our kitchen. Recall the apartment your grandmother bestowed upon me 4 years prior. What are your thoughts on leasing it? I will offer you a competitive pricing significantly lower than what is available in that region. I investigated the matter, and she was not being deceitful. She was soliciting rent approximately 50% lower than that of comparable apartments. I saw the necessity of securing employment to finance it, which became evident. You must sign a formal lease agreement, Mom insisted, presenting the documents she had prepared earlier. I consistently adhered to established protocols. I secured employment at a campus cafe within 1 week. Despite its lack of glamour, I managed to sustain myself between work hours and academic commitments. Despite my typical exhaustion, it was exhilarating to handle matters independently. My daily routine was uncomplicated yet demanding. Rise, attend class, proceed immediately to work, return home late, study till my vision deteriorated, and repeat. I was managing to make things function, or so I presumed, despite the challenges, until that Thursday night when everything transformed. I possess a vivid recollection of it. I had just completed a challenging shift at the cafe. Prior to commencing my academic tasks, my sole desire was to recline on the couch and possibly see some trivial television programs. Nevertheless, I abruptly ceased movement upon unlocking the door to my apartment. My sister, Anna, was sprawled on my couch as though she possessed the area. She appeared quite at ease, perusing her phone while 2 large pieces of luggage sat beside her. What is your purpose for being here? I inquired while remaining at the doorway. She briefly glanced up from her phone. Greetings. You and I are cohabitating. Mother stated that everything was acceptable. I took out my phone right away and dialed Mom. I waited for her to pull me up, my hands trembling. What's happening, Mom? She's moving in here, according to Anna. Will she also have to pay the rent? I felt like I was slapped across the face by her remark. Janice, are you crazy? What sort of foolish inquiries are you making? Anna is obviously not paying her rent. She will live there for free, and you will continue to pay what you have been paying. What? It's unfair. She should cover half the rent if she is residing here. When my mother wasn't going to tolerate any disagreement, her voice became piercing. Pay close attention, Janice. I'm the owner of the flat, and I make the financial decisions. You can leave right now if you don't like it. I checked local apartment postings after Mom's ultimatum, but everything was much above my budget. I decided to swallow my pride and accept the circumstances. Living with my sister was like having a storm as a roommate, since she had never learned to be respectful of other people. The kitchen, the living room, and even the way she would leave the lights on all night, every night, were always lit when I woke up. Anna, could you please remember to turn off the lights when you leave a room? I tried to speak at a level voice when I asked one morning. The electricity bill. She interrupted me without even raising her head from her phone, saying, "Oh, stop being so uptight. It's not that big a deal." However, the lights were only the first step. Her restroom habits were the true terror. There, Anna would spend literally hours taking countless showers and talking on the phone with her pals. My worry was accompanied by the sound of flowing water. I heard her laughing and splashing through the bathroom door one evening as I was getting ready for a test. For more over 2 hours, the water had been running. "Hey, Anna." I knocked on the door and yelled. "You've spent a lifetime inside. Are you aware of the amount of water you're wasting?" Her voice returned, hushed but gratingly happy. "Slow down, sis. Today is my spa day. Mom says I'm free to do as I choose." I went back to my room and tried to concentrate on my textbooks while mentally estimating how much these spa days would probably cost. It had been 3 hours before the water finally ceased. I almost passed out the day the power bill came in. It was twice as much as I typically pay. Double. I was worried how I was going to pay for this on top of my other bills as I stood in the kitchen and looked at the figures. I addressed Anna that night. She was viewing movies on her phone at high volume while splayed out on the couch with her feet up on the coffee table. I held out the paper and said, "We need to talk about the utility bills. Since you moved in, they have doubled. You should be more mindful of how much power and water you use." With a grin on her lips, she glanced up at last and said, Or what? Or you'll need to find somewhere else to live." She took notice of that. Her eyes narrowed as she straightened her posture. "Pardon me? In particular, Mom told me that I could do anything I wanted here. Remember, you're meant to serve me. Mom stated as much." All of the annoyance, the injustice of the circumstance, and everything I had been suppressing suddenly came flooding back. Everything exploded out. "Pack your things," I stated in a very composed tone. "Leave. Right now. This residence is not yours." She screamed and leaped to her feet. "I'm the one paying for it, and I say you're leaving now." We were at a standstill for a time. Then, while muttering obscenities, Anna began flinging her belongings into her luggage. While packing, she banged things over, slammed drawers, and made as much noise as she could. At last, she hauled her bags to the door, gave me a last look, and yelled out, "You're going to regret this," before rushing out and slamming the door so forcefully that the windows shook. My phone began to ring just as I was beginning to catch my breath. The screen showed Mom's name. Even though I knew what was coming, I responded with a trembling hand. "What do you think you're doing?" I had to keep the phone away from my ear since her voice was so loud. "Who do you think you are to kick your sister out?" "Mom, she's been." "Stop talking. You didn't have any right." At this point, she was virtually screaming. "You hear me? Gather your belongings and leave. I'm going to double your rent unless you leave. Your decision." I finally let out the rage that had been simmering inside of me for weeks. "You know what?" I retorted, my voice shaking with rage. "I'd rather pay 5 times as much somewhere else than spend another minute dealing with this crazy situation." I hung up before she could answer. I grabbed my luggage from beneath the bed and barged into my bedroom. I began tossing clothes into it without even folding them. I gathered my belongings around the flat as my vision was obscured by angry tears. I started taking out my textbooks as soon as I reached the bookcase. My errant motions caused them to fall out of my hands since they were uncomfortable and heavy. I slammed the bookshelf door shut with all my strength, frustrated. It happened at that moment. On top of the bookshelf, a number of heavy volumes that I had not seen fell, striking me in the head. I said, "Just perfect," as I rubbed my head and scowled at the volumes that had fallen. I saw a piece of paper that had fallen out of one of them flutter to the ground at that moment. I stooped to pick it up, supposing it was just a misplaced bookmark or an old receipt. But my heart stopped as I unfurled it. Clearly photocopied, but yet completely readable, it was a legal document. The words "Last Will and Testament" were bolded at the top. There was the date, just a few months before she passed away, and my grandmother's name. As I read through it, my fingers began to shake. It was written in plain and white. I had been given this flat, the same apartment for which I had been paying rent, and my grandmother had left money to my mother and Anna. With the will still gripped in my shaking hands, I collapsed to the ground as memories flooded back. Now, like parts of a puzzle I had been too blind to see, everything began to make terrible sense. 4 years ago, just following Grandma's burial, I could still hear my mother's voice in my brain. I recalled Mom making her news when we were all seated in our living room, surrounded by family. Mom left everything to me, she stated in a calm, persuasive voice. Every penny, every piece of property. She wanted everything to be handled by me. No one questioned her since she had glanced around the room and met everyone's eyes with such honesty. I recalled hesitantly raising my hand, like a schoolgirl hesitant to pose a foolish query. But why did Grandma leave us nothing, Mom? To me and Anna. I could never forget the look she gave me, the mix of sympathy and annoyance. These things are difficult, Janice. We must honor the decision made by your grandma. You just must come to terms with it. Embrace it. Now those words have a different impact. In the months that followed, I saw Anna abruptly start wearing high-end clothing and the newest iPhone. They termed it a mother-daughter bonding trip, and Mom and Anna went shopping in Paris and Milan, a 2-week European trip. I suddenly realized how much money they were spending carelessly. The year-long European trip, the shopping spree, and all those pricey presents for Anna, while I was staying at home working a summer job at the neighborhood grocery store. Anna had been inherited it. They had spent money directly in front of me, presumably giggling at the fact that I never challenged it. And they hadn't just kept my apartment from me. They had forced me to pay for everything, including the monthly rent and electricity. Living in a location that was legally mine, I had been working nonstop at that cafe, making the most of every dollar. I felt like I was slapped in the face by the lease agreement's harsh irony. Mom's words was almost audible to me. Janice, we must do everything correctly. I have extremely specific tastes in these things. Everything must be appropriately filed and documented. My angry chuckle reverberated around the deserted flat. With the exception of perhaps informing her daughter that her grandmother had bequeathed her an entire apartment, she was meticulous about documentation. She had somehow forgotten that small detail. As I gave it more attention, additional memories came to mind, each with a darker new significance. When I gave over money for a flat that was legitimately mine, Mom would lecture me about responsibility and remind me that rent was due. The way she would grin as I thanked her for the great rent offer. She had also threatened to evict me from my own flat only a few hours prior. I carefully took pictures of each page of the will with my trembling hands. Before sending it to my mother, I checked that every word was readable and clear. The instant the message was delivered, 2 blue check marks appeared a few seconds later. She had witnessed it. I gazed at the screen of my phone, seeing the 3 dots as they came and went. My mother, who is normally so quick to respond and always prepared with an answer for anything, was speechless. She was sitting there, most likely at her kitchen table, trying desperately to find out how to spin this, and I could practically see her. It was 10 minutes, 20, 30. The dots appeared and disappeared like a panicked Morse code. Every time they showed there, I stiffened, anticipating her reaction. I was grimly satisfied every time they vanished. Allow her to wriggle. My phone didn't ring until over an hour had passed. I inhaled deeply before responding. Her tone was intentionally calm, as if she were attempting to smooth over an issue. Janice, sweetie, she said, this isn't what you think. Really? Since I believe that to be precisely what I believe. She went on. I've been meaning to tell you about this for so long, as though I hadn't said anything. I simply couldn't find the ideal time. However, you may now have the flat since you learned about it. You own it. Let's move on from this awful situation and begin over. I gave a hard chuckle. Begin anew? Do you want me to simply forget about it? Did you forget that I gave you Grandma's will? Do you forget that only a few hours earlier you attempted to evict me from my own flat? Forget that I've been renting you an apartment that is truly mine for over 2 years. Janice, please. No, Mother. I want my money refunded in full. I've paid you rent each and every time. I want everything to return. The opposite end of the queue was silent for a minute. Her voice was no longer lovely when she spoke again. You wouldn't dare. Wouldn't I? Following everything that we have done for you, you'd take your own mother to court. You mean, after all that you've done to me? After stealing my inheritance and forcing me to pay rent on my own property, you attempted to evict me when I refused to let Anna take advantage of me. I would dare then. I ended the call. I opened my banking app with shaking hands and began to go through my transaction history, which included 23 months' worth of carefully recorded rent payments. Ironically, my mother had always commended me for my ability to maintain records. I took out my emergency savings book and began to figure things out. I could really afford to employ a lawyer now that I wasn't paying rent. A decent one. Since the day I moved into this flat, I had been keeping track of every transaction, bank statement, and piece of paper pertaining to it. With its dark oak furnishings and walls covered with legal texts, the law office was calm and polished. Sitting opposite from Miss Roberts, I watched as she went over the papers I had brought, including my rental agreements, bank records that detailed all of my payments, and everything else I could locate. As she looked up from the papers, she remarked, "This is quite straightforward." Her face was a blend of professional attention and sympathy. This flat was obviously bequeathed to you by your grandma in her will. Rent from you or anybody else was not legally due to your mother. I bent over. So what can I do? She said, "You're entitled to compensation," and produced a legal pad. Not just for the 23 months you've been paying rent, but also for the 2 years before that when your mother was renting it to other tenants. The following hour was devoted to computations. Your regular rent payments, as well as the rent your mother earned from past renters, were broken down month by Miss Roberts, who was meticulous. She added columns and typed figures while accounting for the then current market prices. There were more computations. I had to blink twice at the number when she finally thrust the paper in my direction. 8,740, she stated. We'll round it to 60,000 for simplicity. I became a little lightheaded. That much? We could also pursue interest charges, she said after nodding. For over 4 years, your parents have effectively been using your money as an interest-free loan. Standard interest rates might be computed by us. No, I cut in. Just the rent. That's sufficient. I finished the papers and then called my mom from the parking lot of the legal office. I was surprised at how steady my voice was. We must speak, Mom. Is it possible for you to visit the flat tomorrow? Bring the property records. She paused for a long moment before agreeing. I'd heard her key in the lock the next morning. She entered holding a manila package and appeared anxious. She attempted a grin as she replied, "I brought the ownership papers. Everything you need to move the flat into your name is here. I've already prepared them." On the kitchen table, where she had forced me to sign the rental agreement so many months prior, she laid out the paperwork. I didn't miss the irony. She said, "Janice, honey," and pushed the papers in my direction. "I am aware that I committed a grave error. I'm requesting your pardon. Don't be upset with me, please. We can move forward from this and..." Sliding another document across the table, the demand letter my lawyer had written, I interrupted her. "You have 2 weeks to pay back the $60,000 you took from me." All pretense of regret disappeared as soon as my mother completed reading the demand letter. She sprang out of her chair so hard that it fell on the ground. Then the yelling started. She said, "You ungrateful little witch. How dare you do this to your own mother?" I think I saw pieces of plaster dust fall from the ceiling as the music reverberated so strongly off the walls. It must have seemed like a murder to the neighbors. I made myself maintain my composure. "Mom, you can yell all you want. Nothing changes as a result. I'll sue you unless you pay me what you owe. Consider the following: legal expenses, fraud charges, and your community reputation. Your decision. Pictures shook on the walls as she slammed the door shut as she rushed out of the flat. She was still yelling when I heard her marching down the hallway. I assumed that was the last thing I would do for the day. I was mistaken. Within an hour, the calls began to come in. My father was the first. He insisted, "How could you do this to us? After everything we've done for you." My chuckle was sour. "You're an ungrateful and scrupulous child," I said. "Rich from parents who deceived their own daughter into paying rent for a flat she owned. That's unappreciative and meticulous. When you were cashing my rent payments each month, where was your conscience?" I hung up, but he spluttered something about commitment to family. Anna followed. She cried out, "You're going to ruin everything. My parents won't be able to afford my college if they have to give you all that money. Do you want to ruin my future like that?" "Anna, your future is not my concern. I got a job, worked hard, and saved money. Perhaps you might do the same." I am aware that this is a novel notion. The calls continued. Mom would cry and yell at the same time. Dad would preach about respect and family responsibilities. Anna would manipulate and guilt trip. From dawn to night, they alternated in tag-teaming me. After I banned their numbers, they occasionally called from various phones. My father phoned in a different tone after a week of this. He continued, "We meet one more time," in a sluggish voice. "Can you give us a month instead of 2 weeks?" I thought about it. A month was still fair, the lawyer had told me. All right, a month. Not another day. It was calm for the following 4 weeks, strangely silent. No more guilt trips, no more calls, and no more yelling. I nearly became concerned that they were plotting something. However, I checked my bank account precisely 1 month after my mother's breakdown in my kitchen. There it was, a complete transfer of $60,000. 3 months have passed since the funds first showed up in my account. Last week, I received a call from Aunt Carol. For once, I appreciated her urge to share facts, even if she has always been the family gossip. She informed me, "Your parents had to take out a bank loan to pay you back," in a worried yet interested tone. "They're really struggling with the payments now." I listened as she spoke on while I sat on my grandmother's couch. Anna is no longer enrolled at college. The tuition is beyond their means. She waited, perhaps anticipating my expression of regret or guilt. She's just sitting at home, complaining about how you ruined her life. I considered Anna, who had always expected everything to be given to her and had never worked a day in her life. "Maybe it's time she learned to stand on her own feet," I said. At that moment, a recollection came to me so vividly that it was like watching a movie. The will reading day. I had been preparing to accompany Mom to the notary's office. I would dress in my finest black gown, attempting to project an air of maturity and responsibility. Then, with a troubled expression, Mom entered my room. "Anna's sick," she declared. "She has a high temperature. You must remain at home with her." I recall being let down, but I came to terms with it as simply another sacrifice for my sister. I now realize that Anna was most likely not ill at all. It was just another untruth in a long line of deceptions, another manipulation. Why my mother took my fortune is not the question that haunts me at night. I know what greed is. How she got away with it so easy is what baffles me. Aunt Carol didn't know anything about the notary when I questioned her about it, but her hypothesis makes sense. The notary most likely just believed my mother when she said she would share the will with the family. To give the impression that she was bringing everything home to show us, Mom may have even brought a stack of paperwork. How many small moments now feel contaminated is the hardest part. Was Mom giggling inside every time she complimented me on my financial responsibility? Was she proud of her cunning when she demanded that official leasing agreement? Over supper, did she and Dad talk about their deception? Did they give themselves a pat on the back for their brilliant scheme? My flat with Grandma is still where I reside. My flat. Now that I'm not paying rent on something I previously owned, the apartment seems different. The money that used to be sent to Mom each month is now being saved. I occasionally grin as I glance at my bank account and consider how different things are now. Last week, I received a promotion to assistant manager from the cafe where I work. Some may believe that since I'm not paying rent, I don't need the work anymore, but I've come to appreciate independence and having money of my own that no one can take away. Sometimes their names still pop up on my phone: Anna, Dad, and Mom. They continue to attempt from new numbers even after I banned theirs. I ignore their voicemails and erase them. What were they going to say? We apologize for stealing your inheritance. We apologize for forcing you to pay rent on your own house. We apologize. The only reason we were caught was because several books landed on your head. On most days, I'm all right. I study in the evenings, work my hours at the cafe, and attend classes. I've done some redecoration in an effort to make the flat feel less like a crime scene and more like my own place. But occasionally, typically in the middle of the night, the rage returns. The years of lies, the casual cruelty of having me believe my grandma hadn't cared enough to leave me anything, were just as much of a shock as the theft. According to my therapist, feeling this way is common. She claims that trust, family, and treachery are more important than money or a flat. She's assisting me in processing it and teaching me how to maintain composure and equilibrium when the memories seem like they could overwhelm me. I've established a new custom. I sip coffee from Grandma's favorite cup every Sunday morning while I sit in her old reading chair by the window. I reflect about her, how she trusted me to look after this home, and how she wanted me to have it. I feel connected to her once again during such times, as if she somehow understands that the truth has finally been revealed.